Hello, welcome back to Storytime with Alex, reading Book 3 from Allbyon to Britannia, The Last Wizard. Though we've discovered Sebastian Jones is not the last wizard, because Miles has now become his apprentice. Sebastian's had a meeting with a strange green hippie woman. Well, I don't think she was actually green, but she's a green woman, who's told him all of this, and that Miles is going to have something to do, and he'll need Sebastian's help. Now, anyone who watched the last episode will know that I stumbled a lot on words and I am quite tired, so I don't promise to do any better this time, but I've got a cup of tea and I will try my best. So sit back and relax and listen to Chapter 14, The Wizard's Apprentice and the Secrets of Temple House. On Saturdays, my Muslim friend Hadi went to his mosque school to learn Arabic and the Quran. My Polish friend Jerzy went to Polish Community Centre to speak Polish and learn Polish culture, and I went over to Sebastian's flat to learn the theory and practice of magic and the ethics of being a wizard. I didn't hide what I did. If anyone asked who Sebastian was, I would tell them he was my tutor. If they asked what he was tutoring me in, I would talk about extracurricular studies. If they persisted, I might use the word thaumaturgy, but if they were genuinely interested, I would tell them I was training to be a wizard. Then most people would laugh and change the subject, though a couple of people asked me more. I would never share a spell, even with my best friends, though I might be willing to make a spell for them if I thought it was necessary. I would always have to justify making a spell to Sebastian. I was not allowed to show off. Sebastian was determined on that. However, as he said, I had to do what he said, not what he did. The summer term proceeded. Ruth was similarly engaged with Rose in learning how to be a witch. Her mother was also learning, when her life was not full of her work. She seemed to be so much happier, as if remembering what had happened when she was small had opened something inside her that had been locked away. With her help, Leah was enrolled in the school that Ruth went to. She did have the help of a tutor, as she'd missed quite a lot of schooling, but did not have to be challenged with the necessity of wearing a uniform. Good, uniforms are stupid, that's a side note, sorry. Then Father Joe suddenly took a trip back to Scotland, saying he was going to sell his flat in Edinburgh. He came back with a mysterious long handwritten letter for Miss P. When most of us were having tea in her cottage, he presented it to her with some ceremony. She looked at the end of it. It was signed Mrs. Brenda Brown. It took her a long time to read it, and she would not pass on the pages to anyone else until she had finished the whole letter, so we all became consumed with curiosity. When she came to the end, she looked up. "Well, I never," was all she could say. One by one we read the letter, passing each page along as each of us finished it. The letter. Dear Miss Phillips, firstly, I want to apologise to Mr. Jones for my part in what happened to him and the use I made of his book of spells. I want to apologise to you for my part in the attempt to kidnap you, and to everyone else. I also want to send my apologies to Leah and her grandmother. I was so consumed by my desire for revenge that I completely ignored their plight and did nothing to help them. Getting mixed up with Mr. and Mrs. Black was one of the worst decisions I ever made. I came upon them online. If I'd not been so bent on revenge, I would have had more sense than to have anything to do with them. I've had many long talks with Father Bennet over the last few weeks, and he has advised me to tell you what has happened to me recently, if only to demonstrate to you how genuinely sorry I am. After we were, quite rightly, expelled from your house, the Blacks were angry and very frightened. Unsurprisingly, as it had been partly my idea, they turned against me. After a few days they threw me out, almost literally. I ended up on the pavement outside Temple House with a suitcase on wheels and a carrier bag. I did not have enough money to go to a hotel. The rest of my belongings that I had bought from Scotland were at Mrs. Johnson's house further up your road. I did not want to come to the Triangle, but I had to reclaim my possessions. Pause for tea. Resume. I phoned Mrs. Johnson, but she had seen what had happened at your house. She was also frightened and no longer wanted to have anything to do with me. She said I could come and collect my belongings, but I couldn't stay with her. To avoid seeing anyone, I came quite late that evening. She'd put all my belongings on her front step and would not even answer the door to me. She might well not have been in the house at all. I had no idea what to do. I could not even take all my belongings away with me because they were too heavy. I could have walked around to the cab office and ordered a taxi, but I had nowhere to go. I left everything on her doorstep and wandered around, feeling very sorry for myself. Eventually, I went into Albury Gardens. There was a light on in the little chapel that has been built there, but I did not have the nerve to go in case there was someone there who knew me. I sat down on one of the benches, and I'm not ashamed to say I burst into tears. I started to cry because I was feeling very sorry for myself, and then I was crying because I missed my husband so much. He was full of wild ideas and strange notions, but he was also a kind and considerate husband. He died so suddenly that I never had the chance to say goodbye. I did not hear her approaching, but a lady sat down next to me on the bench. She was barefoot and only wearing a green frock. I thought she might be something to do with the peace centre that is open there. Then she spoke. "Oh, Brenda, you must be feeling so alone, and you must miss Stuart so much after so many years together." I jumped. "How do you know my name? How do you know about Stuart?" She just smiled at me, and though she did not answer my question, for some reason I trusted her. She gently put her arm around my shoulder, and I rested on her. I did not stop crying, but I was beginning to feel safe and comforted. Eventually, I managed to get my breathing under control and stop crying. "Go into the chapel, Brenda," she said. "There is someone there who will help you." I got up from the bench and walked towards the chapel. I felt nervous and looked back, but she had gone. I took a deep breath and entered the chapel. Someone was kneeling in prayer. He turned as I entered, and I recognised Father Bennet. I knew he was a friend of yours, and nearly turned around and walked out. "Good evening, Mrs. Brown. You came into my mind, and I have been praying for you." I suppose I was so certain he'd be angry with me that his gentle way just brought me to tears again. We sat together in that little round chapel, and I told him everything. He probably knew much of it already, but I suppose I was confessing my sins. It's not the tradition I come from, but I unburdened myself to him, and eventually, when I had to come to a halt, he put his hands on my head and blessed me, and I felt free. Free to grieve Stuart's death, free of all those feelings of anger and the desire for revenge. It must have been after 1 in the morning by now. Father Bennet took me by the hand and led me to what had been Mr. Campbell's house. He let himself in. One of the monks who lived there was in the kitchen. He took me to their guest room and left me to sleep. I slept for many hours, and when I awoke, someone had collected all my belongings from Mrs. Johnson's porch and piled them up neatly on the foot of my bed. Someone must have heard me moving around, and there was a knock at the door. Father Bennet came in with a cup of tea. Later, we had a long talk by his own tea. He asked me what I wanted to do, and after a good deal of thought, I realised that what I wanted to do was go home to Scotland. Apologies for not doing accents, but you know my feelings on this. We'd retired to a little village. I guess I am doing a weird little posh voice, though, whatever. I'm really distracting myself. We'd retired to a little village in the Highlands when Stuart died. I had run away. The day after his funeral, I had returned to Inverness with my sister. I had stayed with her for weeks and spent all my time trying to work out how to get my own back on Mr. Jones and yourself. I would have been so much better staying in my little house and missing Stuart, and that is what I wanted to do now. Father Bennet had a discussion with the monks, and they arranged to borrow a van and drive me home. It took 2 days, but Father Bennet and Brother Anselm were so kind to me. I am sitting in my own kitchen, looking out at the beauty of the Scottish Highlands, and I hope most fervently that you will forgive me for everything I have done to you. We will probably never meet again, and I wish you all well in all your endeavours, both in the world of magic and all the rest of your lives. Vlad and Hecate Black, under whatever name, are a thoroughly unpleasant couple, and I repeat that I bitterly regret having anything to do with them. I do not know their plans, and they were very frightened when I last saw them. However, they were also very angry. I hope you never come across them again, but if you do, please be very wary of them. Yours most sincerely, Brenda Brown, Mrs. When we had all finally read the letter, we were all stunned. We all had questions for Father Joe. I usually forgot that Bennet was his surname, at least for the present. Miss P. shed a little tear. Leah found it difficult to believe. Sebastian laughed. Well, good for her. Leopards can change their spots after all. How fascinating. She's had an encounter with a barefoot lady in the green dress too. As for the blacks, the police finally went to Temple House to question them about Ada's pension book. Vlad and Hecate denied doing anything wrong, but this must have added to their fear, because when the police returned the next day, they disappeared and were never seen there again. We were all disappointed they had not been brought to justice, but it was good to know that they had gone. A week later, Temple House was put up for sale by auction. Father Joe went to the auction himself and bought it under the name of Mr. Joseph Bennet. He wanted to make sure that the garden was safe for the fairies. He was unsure whether to have it restored and redeveloped as flats, or whether it would be easier to demolish it and build something new. He went round to have a good look, and realised that it was full of furniture and other things to be dealt with. When Sebastian heard this, his ears pricked. This sounds like a field trip, young Miles. He had taken to going on what he called day trips with me as part of my training. We'd been to the British Museum to look at John Dee's scrying mirror and visited the churches designed by Nicholas Hawksmoor. We spent one Saturday looking for coins in the mud of the Thames, with the mudlarks who have the licences you need. So the following Saturday he borrowed the keys from Father Joe and went off to Pilgrim's Green. When we arrived, Sebastian stopped at the gate and stared at Temple House. This is the first time I've had a good look at this house in daylight when I wasn't drugged or in a hurry, and now I know I've been here before the blacks came here. He laughed. Oh yes, a long time before that. You're forgetting how old I am. Now I'm standing here, I can remember it being quite smart. The front was clean and white, and the paintwork shiny black. The house was not particularly old then. It must have been in the 1920s, after the First World War. The owners had got very interested in magic, or what they hoped was magic, not dreadful people like Crowley. They hoped magic would make the world a better place, but I like to keep an eye on anyone like that, just in case they found something real. I like to keep an eye... Hold on, tea. I seem to remember them being quite sad, though I can't remember the details, but they gave good parties. It was strange unlocking the front door in the normal way and entering the house. Okay, let's just take a moment to gather our thoughts while I pull myself together. Let's have another sip of tea. Actually, you know what? Given that this is quite a long chapter, and we've got to the beginning of this bit, I'm going to pause, and this chapter's going to be in 2 parts, so join me next time for the next part of chapter 13.